Dear learners, welcome back to WSE Cultural Legacy, where learning English meets the hidden wisdom of history. Today, we open a door not into palaces or battlefields, but into kitchens, gardens, and quiet family tables. For it is there, often in silence, that some of the world's greatest treasures have been guarded, the recipes passed from one generation to the next. These recipes are not written in dusty archives or engraved on stone monuments. They live in memory, in gesture, in the rhythm of a grandmother's hands as she kneads dough, or in the careful silence of a father teaching his child how to balance spices without measuring. They are as fragile as breath, and yet they have survived centuries. Why? Because food, at its deepest level, is more than nourishment. It is identity, love, and memory made edible. Imagine a winter evening in Japan, where the warmth of miso soup carries centuries of care in every sip. Think of a family in New Zealand gathering around a smoky earth oven, cooking a traditional hangi that has tied communities together for generations. Picture a cold Canadian morning, where the golden sweetness of maple syrup poured over bread is not just flavor, but history preserved in taste. These are not just meals. They are stories we can taste, but rarely ever hear spoken out loud. And that is our journey today, to listen to the silent voices inside these hidden recipes, to uncover what they meant to those who carried them forward, and to reflect on what they might still mean for us now. Along the way, we will ask, how do recipes survive when empires fall, when languages fade, when even memory struggles to hold on? What makes some flavors eternal, while others vanish into history's shadows? If you'd like to support our work, you're welcome to like, comment, share, or join us. Your support means a lot and helps us keep going. Together, let's uncover not just the flavors of the past, but the values, struggles, and quiet hopes they carried. And yet, as inviting as these dishes sound, there is something unsettling. Why do certain recipes hide, kept away from outsiders, almost as if they were secrets too dangerous to share? When we hear the phrase hidden recipe, we might picture something mysterious written in a secret notebook, locked away in a drawer. But in reality, the most powerful recipes are rarely written down at all. They are remembered, embodied, protected. They live in hands and voices, not in books. That is why they can feel so fragile, and yet also so strong. But why? What makes certain communities hold on to recipes as if they were sacred treasures, while others let them fade with time? Consider this paradox. Nations have risen and fallen, rulers have come and gone, but certain dishes remain unchanged for centuries. In Japan, the art of preparing sushi once belonged to guilds of masters who controlled every detail of the craft. In New Zealand, Maori earth oven traditions survived colonization, missionary influence, and modern industry. In Canada, Indigenous peoples carried forward the knowledge of wild rice, salmon, and maple syrup, even when their way of life was under threat. Why were these foods not lost? Why did they become symbols of survival, not simply of taste? The truth is that recipes are never just about flavor. They are about belonging. To share a recipe is to admit someone into the heart of a community. To hide one, to guard it from outsiders, is to protect not just food, but identity. That is why many cultures have stories of secret sauces, mysterious blends of herbs, or family dishes that no stranger can ever fully reproduce. In these secrets lies both protection and power. If a recipe defines who you are, then letting it go too easily risks losing yourself. But here is the dilemma. What happens when these recipes must be shared in order to survive? If an elder holds the memory of a dish, but the next generation leaves for the city, how can that recipe live on? If the world changes faster than the kitchen can adapt, can the old flavors still speak to the present? This tension, between guarding tradition and adapting to change, is the burning question behind every hidden recipe. Think about it for yourself. If you had one family recipe that carried the spirit of your ancestors, would you guard it tightly as a private jewel, or share it widely so that it would never be forgotten? Would protecting it mean keeping it alive, or letting it slowly vanish? These are not easy questions, and yet they echo in every culture that has ever struggled to preserve its past. And so, behind every bowl of soup, every loaf of bread, every roasted fish or hidden spice blend, there lies a story not just of taste, but of survival, of identity, and of silent decisions made across generations. The question we must follow now is this: how exactly did these recipes travel through history, surviving wars, migrations, and cultural shifts, when so much else was lost? To trace the path of hidden recipes through time, we need to walk not through royal halls or great libraries, but through markets, fishing villages, mountain farms, and family kitchens. For it is in these quieter places that the true story of cultural survival often unfolds. Let us begin in Japan during the Edo period, when the art of food was bound not only to pleasure but to ritual and discipline. Sushi, now a global symbol of Japanese cuisine, began as a method of preservation. Fish was packed with rice and salt to ferment slowly, providing nourishment long after the catch. At first, this was simple survival. But over time, it became art. Chefs refined techniques, selected the freshest fish, and presented dishes with aesthetic beauty tied to Zen principles of balance and simplicity. Yet the knowledge was not freely given. Apprentice chefs trained for years, often without touching a knife, learning first to wash rice, to observe, to wait. Recipes were held within lineages of masters, guarded against careless hands. To eat was to taste history, to prepare was to inherit discipline. Half a world away, the Maori of New Zealand preserved their identity through the hangi, an earth oven feast. Stones heated in a fire were buried with food beneath the ground, slow cooking meat and root vegetables until they became tender and smoky. More than a method, it was an occasion. Families and tribes gathered, telling stories while the earth itself cooked their meal. In a time when colonization sought to reshape their ways of life, this practice remained a thread to ancestral memory. Even when modern stoves arrived, many Maori families continued the tradition, passing down not only the technique but the communal spirit it carried. It was never simply about how to cook. It was about who they were when they gathered to eat. Meanwhile in Canada, indigenous peoples protected recipes shaped by the seasons. The annual harvest of wild rice, known as manuman, required patience and deep knowledge of the waterways. Families paddled through lakes, gently knocking rice into canoes with wooden sticks. Once dried, it was parched over fire, threshed, and winnowed. This was not merely food, it was a sacred gift tied to creation stories and spiritual life. During times of colonial disruption, when hunting grounds shrank and traditions were suppressed, this food remained an anchor to identity. And then there was maple syrup, the liquid gold of the northern forests. Generations learned when to tap the trees, how to boil sap to sweetness, how to taste the turning of the seasons. The recipes made from it, cakes, breads, candies, were both sustenance and ceremony, a reminder that the forest itself was a living partner in survival. Across these lands, one pattern emerges: recipes endured not because they were convenient, but because they carried meaning beyond taste. They connected the living to the dead, the present to the past. Each preparation was a ritual, each shared meal a silent vow: we will not forget who we are. And yet, survival was never simple. Wars, forced migrations, and industrial change threatened these hidden treasures. In Japan, modernization in the Meiji era brought Western food trends, but still sushi endured. In New Zealand, hangi nearly disappeared as urban life grew, yet today it remains a proud symbol of cultural revival. In Canada, Indigenous communities were pressured to abandon their foodways, but many traditions persisted quietly, waiting for a time when they could once again be practiced openly. Recipes became a form of quiet resistance, surviving where armies and rulers could not. Think of it this way: if history is often written by the powerful, food history is preserved by the humble. A mother teaching her child to grind rice, a grandfather passing down the exact moment when syrup reaches its peak sweetness, a community gathering to unearth a steaming hangi, these moments never make it into political chronicles. And yet, they may be the most enduring forms of history we have. But survival has a cost, and behind these traditions lies another layer of story, one that is less visible, hidden beneath the surface like the roots of a tree. Why were certain recipes guarded so carefully, sometimes with silence, secrecy, or even exclusion? What forces shaped the decision to hide, protect, or transform them across centuries? When we look closely at the endurance of hidden recipes, we discover that it was never just about taste or even family memory. Deeper forces, economic, political, and spiritual, were always at play. Recipes could serve as weapons of survival, symbols of resistance, or even tools of control. To understand why they were guarded, we must step behind the curtain of history and trace the invisible motives that made a bowl of soup or a spoonful of sweetness something worth protecting for centuries. Take the example of sushi in Japan. On the surface, it was food. But beneath, it was also a marker of status and discipline. In Edo period Tokyo, the guilds that controlled sushi masters acted much like protectors of sacred knowledge. Apprentices endured years of menial tasks before being allowed to touch ingredients. Why such strict secrecy? Because knowledge was power. If anyone could prepare sushi, the value of the craft would vanish. By limiting access, guilds preserved prestige and controlled markets. This secrecy turned a recipe into more than a meal. It became a badge of belonging, something outsiders could not simply copy. The hidden recipe was not only protection against dilution but also a form of economic survival. In New Zealand, the hangi carried a different motive, one rooted in spiritual identity. For the Maori, the earth oven was not just a cooking technique, it was communion with the land itself. The stones and soil became part of the meal, and in turn, the meal became part of the people. During colonization, missionaries and settlers often dismissed indigenous food practices as primitive. Yet, the Maori continued to preserve their knowledge. Why? Because each hangi was more than flavor, it was a sacred affirmation: we belong to this land, and this land belongs to us. To guard the method was to guard the very story of who they were. Sharing it carelessly with those who did not honor its meaning would weaken that bond. The secrecy here was not about economics but about protecting spiritual integrity. Canada's story shows another layer: the relationship between recipes and survival under pressure. Indigenous foods like wild rice and maple syrup were deeply tied to seasonal cycles and spiritual narratives. Colonization disrupted hunting grounds, imposed new farming methods, and forced assimilation. Yet certain recipes remained hidden, carried forward quietly in families and communities. In this case, secrecy was both shield and resistance. To keep preparing traditional foods in the face of forced change was to silently say, "We are still here." Recipes became invisible weapons of endurance, passed down beneath the gaze of authorities who wanted them erased. To protect a recipe was to protect identity itself. But secrecy is not always noble. In some cases, recipes were hidden for exclusion, for control. In European history, the guilds of bakers, brewers, and spice merchants often concealed their methods not to preserve culture, but to guard profit. Those who knew the secret ratios of herbs or the techniques of fermentation could dominate markets. Outsiders were denied entry. Hidden recipes became tools of hierarchy, reinforcing social boundaries. We must remember that secrecy can both preserve and divide, both protect and oppress. What seems like tradition may also conceal inequality. There is also the emotional force behind secrecy, the fear of loss. Imagine a grandmother in a remote village, watching the world modernize around her. If she shares her recipe openly, what happens when supermarkets replace her herbs or machines replace her tools? She may fear that the recipe will lose its soul when taken out of its context. To guard it closely may be her way of keeping its spirit intact. But there is a paradox: if she never passes it on, the recipe may die with her. Secrecy becomes both lifeline and danger. And beyond economics, beyond spirituality, lies another hidden force: memory. Recipes often hold within them the unspoken stories of suffering. A dish created during famine, a soup made from scraps during war, a sweet preserved for festivals even when poverty was great, such recipes carry pain as well as joy. To guard them is to honor those who endured. But to share them without context might feel like forgetting the struggle that gave them birth. That is why so many recipes are taught in whispers, not in textbooks. They carry not only taste but also the weight of human experience. What does all this tell us? That hidden recipes are never just about food. They are about control and resistance, about survival and exclusion, about identity and fear. And it forces us to ask, when we eat a traditional dish today, are we tasting only flavor, or are we tasting centuries of silence, secrecy, and struggle? Do we truly understand what is on our plate? This awareness changes how we see the simple act of cooking. To stir a pot of miso, to unearth a hangi, to tap a maple tree, these are acts layered with history. They remind us that what is hidden is not only the recipe itself, but also the motives, the struggles, the whispered reasons why some knowledge is shared and other knowledge is guarded like treasure. And yet, behind all the forces of power and secrecy, there remains the most powerful element of all, the human heart. For in the end, recipes survive because people cared enough to protect them. Families risked sharing or not sharing, remembering or forgetting, passing on or letting go. To understand the hidden recipe, we must not only look at history's structures but also listen to the quiet voices of those who lived them. Behind every hidden recipe is not just a method, but a person, a hand stirring the pot, a voice whispering instructions, a heart that chooses whether to share or withhold. To grasp their meaning, we must step closer, into kitchens and gatherings, into the fragile space where culture and memory live side by side. Imagine a Japanese apprentice, 17 years old, scrubbing rice barrels day after day. He dreams of becoming a sushi master, yet for 3 long years he is not allowed to cut fish, not even to shape rice. His master watches silently, testing his patience. Many would give up, but he persists. Why? Because he knows that when his master finally reveals the recipe for the secret vinegar blend, he will inherit not just flavor but honor. His endurance is not simply obedience, it is a belief that mastery requires sacrifice. For him, the hidden recipe is a rite of passage, and when he finally serves his first piece of sushi, it is not just food. It is proof that he has become part of a lineage stretching back centuries. Now picture a Maori family in New Zealand preparing a hangi for a wedding. Children run about, gathering flax leaves, while elders heat the stones and dig the pit. The process takes hours, but no one complains. This is not labor, it is love. As the earth oven is sealed and the meal begins to cook, the family sings songs and tells stories of ancestors. For the bride and groom, the hangi is more than a feast. It is a living reminder that marriage is not only between two individuals, but between families, between generations. The secret here is not in spices or technique. It is in the spirit of community, in the feeling that to eat together is to remember that no one stands alone. Or consider a Canadian grandmother in a small northern town. Each spring, she takes her granddaughter to the maple trees at dawn. The cold air is sharp, the snow crunches underfoot, and the sap drips slowly into wooden buckets. The grandmother explains that her own parents showed her how to boil the sap until it thickened into syrup. She teaches the girl not only the recipe, but also the rhythm of patience, waiting for the boil, testing the sweetness, listening to the bubbling sound. In her voice is tenderness, but also urgency. She knows that without someone to carry this knowledge forward, it may be lost. Her granddaughter will later say that the syrup tasted like love itself, golden and fragile, holding both sweetness and sorrow. These are the human faces of hidden recipes. They show us that secrecy is never cold or mechanical. It is alive with emotions, pride, fear, longing, hope. Some protect recipes fiercely out of pride, believing that their culture must remain pure. Others guard them with fear, afraid that outsiders will misuse or misunderstand. Still others share them out of hope, believing that survival depends on passing knowledge to whoever is willing to learn. Each decision carries weight, and each reflects not just taste but ideology. Consider the ideological debates hidden within these choices. When colonizers in New Zealand mocked the hangi, some Maori leaders refused to abandon it, insisting that their people's food was sacred and worth preserving. Others, however, adopted foreign methods, believing survival required adaptation. Was one group betraying tradition, or was the other group risking extinction by clinging to the past? Both choices were born from love, and both reveal the complexity of protecting culture in times of crisis. Or think of the apprentices in Japanese kitchens. Some argue that the strict secrecy of the masters preserves art and discipline. Others say it creates hierarchy and exclusion, locking talent behind doors of tradition. Who is right? Should recipes be guarded as treasures of the few, or opened as gifts for the many? Each path has costs. Each path raises questions about power, fairness, and identity. Perhaps this is the deepest lesson of human stories in cooking, that recipes are never neutral. They carry emotions and ideologies as much as they carry flavors. They force us to ask difficult questions. When we taste a dish, do we honor its hidden past, or do we consume it without thought? When we inherit a recipe, do we change it to suit our time, or do we preserve it unchanged, even if the world around us transforms? Every bite we take has a history. Every recipe we inherit carries not only instructions but also silent decisions made long ago. To feel this truth is to realize that food is not only survival. It is memory, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of those who came before us. And yet, beyond the emotions and debates, lies a larger question: what do these recipes mean for us today? In a world where fast food and global chains dominate, can these fragile traditions still guide us? Or do they belong only to the past, fading into nostalgia as modern life moves on? The kitchen, once a private and local space, has always been touched by the winds of global exchange. Every spice, grain, or cooking technique carries a story of migration, trade, or conquest. What we call traditional food is often a record of centuries of cultural blending. Consider the chili pepper. Today, it feels inseparable from Thai curries, Indian vindaloo, or Sichuan hot pots. Yet this fiery ingredient is native to the Americas and only reached Asia through Portuguese traders in the 16th century. Over time, it became so deeply woven into these cuisines that many cannot imagine their food without it. A simple plant traveled across oceans and transformed entire culinary identities. Or take the humble tomato. Once considered poisonous in Europe, it eventually became the heart of Italian cooking, from pizza to pasta sauces. Its journey reminds us that adaptation often begins with suspicion before it grows into love. These exchanges were not always peaceful. The spice trade, for instance, fueled colonization, conflict, and exploitation. Nutmeg from the Banda Islands, cinnamon from Sri Lanka, or cloves from the Maluku Islands were so valuable that wars were fought over them. Hidden recipes from these regions often carried the silent resilience of communities that struggled to preserve their identity while their flavors were taken abroad. In today's world, globalization accelerates this exchange. Sushi is eaten in Paris, Mexican tacos are found in Seoul, and French pastries are sold in Marrakesh. Yet, what appears as modern fusion cuisine is only the continuation of a much older story. The recipes we inherit are living records of cultural encounters, marked by adaptation, resistance, and creativity. To taste a dish, then, is to step into a dialogue that stretches across continents and centuries. Every bite carries a history of exchange, and sometimes, a history of struggle. In the end, hidden recipes are not just about food. They are about identity, survival, and the quiet wisdom of generations. To cook a dish passed down through time is to keep alive the voices of those who came before us, even if they left no written records. In the modern world, these traditions face new challenges. Fast food chains, industrial farming, and the pressure of convenience often replace slow, careful cooking. Younger generations may find it easier to order a meal with one click rather than spend hours preparing a dish by hand. If this continues, the risk is that recipes, once preserved through memory and repetition, may slowly vanish. But there is also hope. Across the world, families are beginning to record their recipes, communities are teaching traditional cooking to children, and chefs are rediscovering forgotten ingredients. Social media allows a grandmother's soup in a small village to be shared with millions across the globe. What was once hidden can now be celebrated, not only within one culture but as part of the shared heritage of humanity. Preserving hidden recipes is not about resisting change but about carrying memory into the future. It is about keeping alive the taste of resilience, the knowledge of healing herbs, and the beauty of flavors shaped by centuries of care. When we cook these recipes, we do more than eat. We connect with those who endured hardship, who adapted to change, and who believed that the simple act of preparing a meal could nourish both body and soul. Perhaps the real secret is this: food is never only food. It is history, medicine, memory, and love, served on a plate, waiting to be tasted.